Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic show. This is episode 418. I've got a great guest. I say that every week, but I've been actually really looking forward to this discussion. We got Kurt von Ahnen on the show. I probably totally butchered his surname, but I think I've done better than last week, which was a slightly embarrassing. Kurt, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Sure. Kurt von Ahnen, and I run a company called Mañana No Mas and a podcast and stuff like that. But I'm also full-time employed at Suzuki Motor of America in charge of the training department. So use quite a bit of WordPress products and learning management systems and stuff like that. And man, I'm thrilled to be on the show, Jonathan. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I've been, like I say, I've been really looking forward to the discussion. And I've got my great co-host, Adrian. Adrian, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Hi, my name is Adrian. I am the CEO and founder of Groundhog. We produce marketing automation and sales tools for companies that use WordPress.
And I'll just give you a quick outline what we're going to be discussing, blessed listeners and viewers. I asked Kurt to come on the show because basically I want to discuss what's it like to use something like Lifter, LMS or LearnDash in a corporate environment. What are some of the challenges if you're an agency and you're bidding against a very large established SaaS product? You know, some tips, insights about utilizing open source software like WordPress with two of these great learning management plugins in a corporate environment. I just thought Kurt was a great guy to come on the show and give an outline, which is something you won't hear on a lot of other podcasts. So I thought it'd be a great subject. Before we go into the main part of this discussion, I want to mention one of our great sponsors, and that's Kinsta Hosting. And Kinsta only specialize in hosting WordPress websites. And if you're a power user, either you're an e-learning entrepreneur or you're a developer or a consultant, you need really good quality WordPress hosting to make your learning management system a success. And that's what Kinsta offer. They offer some of the best technical support on the market. All their technical support reps are experts about WordPress. You won't have to wait to be transferred to a level 3 support technician, because they all are. You also get some of the best UX design in a custom interface. You get stage insight, one-click backup, the choice of being able to choose what version of PHP in the interface. I could go on, but it's a class environment and they're a class company. So if you're looking for a real great WordPress hosting partner, go over to kinsta.com, see what they got to offer, and please mention that you heard them on the WP-Tonic show. Now, Kurt, what do you think some of the challenges? This is going to be a pretty large initial question, but maybe we can just you just put it into little chunks. But my first question is, what are some of the challenges that maybe an agency or somebody in a large organization that thinks WordPress with Lifter, LMS or LearnDash would be a great solution? What are some of the challenges he or she are going to face trying to get that accepted in a large organization?
Well, Jonathan, I think back to the call where you and I first came up with the idea to do the show together, and the question had come up, you know, what obstacle is there to get it out? And I said the cost. My idea of the cost was completely contradictory to what I think people expected, and that was, I think we're just too cheap. When you look at some of the custom learning programs that are out there and some of the things that these established companies have been using for a decade, outdated back-end interfaces, it's hard to get your zip files up. I mean, you go on and on about the problems with the systems, but corporate America has accepted these problems as the norm, and they haven't recognized that there are newer, cleaner alternatives that are faster, not only faster and better, but cheaper. And when you go into a corporate room and you say, hey, I can take this $500,000 package that you're paying for and give you something better, faster, cleaner, and lighter for your server, and give it to you for less than $100,000, there's a certain air of disbelief there. And I think that takes a lot to overcome with some established gray-haired folks that are running the show.
Yeah, well, there's kind of old, there's old saying in the IT industry, no medium-sized manager's ever been sacked for saying that the company should use IBM. You're not going to get the sack, but it's not always the greatest solution. It's a bit of old cliche saying, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those obstacles for me. And in fact, when, before I did the corporate thing with Ducati and Suzuki and was doing my own thing, I actually ran into a deal where I thought that I was helping these companies with super affordable web packages, and I kept getting really low quality clients that weren't prepared to be online. And so I doubled my prices. I got better clients, and it was easier to close the sale. And then I doubled my prices again, and it was even easier to close the sale and get better clients. And I thought, well, this is crazy. And I did it over and over and over again until finally Ducati became a client. And after 3 or 4 years of working with Ducati as a contractor, they brought me in full time as an employee. And that's when I built their training program. So it's one of those where I think pricing, especially when you're a solo person, a solopreneur trying to work in the learning management space, I think you look at the cost of a project, or you look at what you project as a fee you would charge, and you're trying to be competitive, and you're trying to earn the business by giving them a smoking hot deal. And I think you're hurting yourself. I think you need to price accordingly to the market, and then realize that when you're dealing with a bigger company, there's a lot more emotional tax. There's a lot more mental tax that goes on that bid than you planned for, and you're going to do the work and earn the money anyway. So you might as well charge it up front.
So can you, before I throw it over to Adrian, can you explain a little bit about your background? Because I can see all these tools in the background. Listeners and listeners, if you go and watch this on the WP-Tonic YouTube channel, you'll be able to see it's got a load of tools. Are you based in the motorsport industry? Is that how you were introduced to Ducati and Suzuki? Because you're part of that environment, that industry in general.
Yeah. My parents split up when I was 6 years old. So my dad pissed off my mother and got me a dirt bike. And I've been riding motorcycles ever since. So I love bikes. I raced motorcycles for 20 years. I became pro at the end of it and realized just how slow I was. The only time you saw me on TV in a race is when the leaders were going past me on the front straightaway. So I can't brag about a racing career, but I can, kind of lean on that experience as to what really got me into the power sports industry. I've worked for multiple car dealerships, worked in the airlines, and then got into the OEM side, the original equipment manufacturer side of power sports. And I love working in the industry. Even though our industry is suffering really badly with a downturn in the economy and sales going down, it's still a great industry and a great sport to be a part of. With Ducati, I actually became a Ducati master technician, and I became their technical trainer and taught everybody in Canada, United States, and Mexico. And it was then that I realized if you're going to have a quality instructor-led course, you have to have a quality theory course ahead of that. Because when you drag people from all over the country to a training arena and you put tools in their hands, you want to make sure you gave them the opportunity to see the theory first. And that was one of the missing things that Ducati really didn't have in place in America when I took that program over. So I used Moodle at the time. I'm a big person with open source and shareware and things that are free and anything to save a buck. So I used Moodle, and the back end was a little confusing. I tried to teach coworkers how to do the reporting and stuff like that, and it was always an issue. Like I could figure it out, and I thought something was wrong with everyone else that couldn't. But it just seemed to be one of those things that was more of an obstacle than a blessing. And so when I left Ducati and went to Suzuki, I looked at other options that were WordPress and more visually based. I thought easier on the end user. And I've been really happy with the options I've used so far.
That's great. Over to you, Adrian.
So just for the couple of companies that you've mentioned so far, you seem to be focusing on both Suzuki and Ducati. Are those the big ones for you?
Yeah, those are the two serious ones I worked for. Before that, it was all dealership based. I worked at a dealership in Albuquerque. I've done a few in Denver, started in Pennsylvania. So at the dealer level and at the service level for dealerships, I didn't have to do any of this stuff.
Right. And
it was during the downturn in the economy, 2007 and 8, that I took this little web hobby of mine and said, you know what? if I can't keep providing for my family in a retail environment, I'm going to do like a business to business thing. And I started building sites and basically my own agency in Albuquerque.
Right.
And that's
for those larger companies, was the training that you actually built and the back end, that wasn't for the customers, that was actually internal, right?
For the technicians in the field. So I got to be real careful saying like retail, wholesale, however you want to phrase that, because like Ducati's an office run really with 30 people in a room. So if you said internal, a lot of people would think it was for those 30 people. It was really for the 600 technicians that worked around the country, Canada and Mexico.
Right. But they don't actually like work for the company. They're in like the dealerships or.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then by design, like Ducati, Suzuki, Yamaha, Honda, all those companies, they wouldn't make their training material available to the general public, which is, you don't want to say it's open to the public. It's only open. It's like a closed network.
Right. So you have to get the gateway access first.
Yeah. And you got to do, membership management and passwords and, nothing can be open. And so it takes a little management on the back end, which is part of that statement I made at the beginning. Which
leads me into my follow-up question. Thank you for that segue. When you're actually going to these larger organizations and you're going through the process and you're answering their questions and you say, we can do all of this for you for like this much less amount of money than what you're currently paying for whoever else. What is it that you actually include in that package in order to make it seem like, oh my God, this is really, really what we're looking for? Is it just the LMS site? Is there a support that goes with it? Is there some sort of other package that recurs yearly? Like what are you actually selling to these companies?
So this is where I sound like I'm not patronizing you, Adrian. I'm trying to pat you on the back. I've seen you on a few of these calls, and I think you're a wonderful speaker and salesperson with the product you represent. You're kind of inspiring in that way. It's the same tool set that I use when I'm talking to a big company that you use when you're talking to folks. It's a needs assessment first. So I go in, I interview that client, and I literally sit down with a legal pad, and I just start asking questions and writing things down. How many learners do you think you have? What's the time frame to get things done? What's your heavy season and your light season for web traffic and bandwidth? And a lot of times they don't have those answers. They've been in these positions for decades, and as executive management, they just don't know. But you sow that seed by asking the question. And then at the end of that, I basically look at my legal pad and I go, well, the good news is I can meet, 12 out of 14 of these needs, or I can meet 9 out of 12, whatever. And and then typically, and this is more about my sales technique than product, but they'll say, well, how much is that going to cost? And then I'll say, well, realistically, I think what we need to do is you take this to the people that are actually making the buying decision, because I know it's not you, and you see what the budget is that you can afford for this type of activity. Get back to me and I'll see how many of these items we can keep on the list with the budget you have available.
Slick. And
then it's amazing. The budget always comes back higher than what I would have asked for. And then it's simple, because then I can say, you know what, good news, great news. I found out that I can also, subcontract, sublet, whatever, and take care of these 3 missing bullet points for you for the same money. And then it becomes a value add conversation. I make more money, they get full services, and I'm able to employ a couple of contractors on the side.
Awesome. Back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I thought that was a great outline, but obviously you had these connections in the motorcycle industry. How do you think agencies or consultants or somebody this won't apply to somebody internal that wants to champion utilizing something like WordPress for their training platform, but let's concentrate on external vendor who might not have those internal relationships. Do you think, if you were in their shoes, what kind of outreach would you do? What would be the kind of approach you would utilize to get that first conversation going?
I can tell you specifically what doesn't work, and that is going through LinkedIn and trying to figure out everybody's corporate email based on their first name, last name, and corporate URL, and cold calling people with emails. I must delete 100 emails a day. For me, it's all relationship based, and whether you have that relationship because you're in the industry and you're already a hot wire in, or whether you make that relationship, you can do it through LinkedIn. You can friend somebody, message them, start to get to know them, and then transfer that conversation. But I'm really against the whole cold calling issue and trying to get people to buy $100,000 package because they recognize your name on LinkedIn. That's not going to work. And I should be clear about another thing, Jonathan, and that is, when I say that I was slow at racing and people didn't know who I was, that's not an understatement. So it wasn't a plug and play thing for me with Ducati. I actually published a book on service writing in 2007, and Ducati found that book online. They read the book and then they went, oh, this guy knows everything about service. And so they contacted me through that book, and then they said, hey, who are you? And so then they got the thing, like, I'm in power sports. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. You worked in dealerships, you're in power sports, you're a motorcycle enthusiast. And it all just kind of stacked up. And then they said, okay, well, we would like to talk to you about writing a course for us. And that's how the whole corporate training thing really took over. It was like, so you want me to write a course? I wrote it. And then I said, how much do you want to pay for it? Because now I already wrote it. And then they said, well, we don't really want to buy the course. How about if you teach the course? I said, well, I could certainly teach. That's fine, because I was an MSF instructor. So I taught the course. And then they said, we want to have big events in Las Vegas. I said, okay, great. I'll go to Vegas. You got to pay my travel. And then they said, but we don't have anyone to run those events. Could you run those events too? Like, do the bookings and the catering and all that stuff? Okay, sure. Like, I don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out. And it's just one thing after another after another. 4 years of that, and it was really successful, and that kind of became my niche.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for outlining that, because it's like most things, there was a lot of steps in building credibility and establishing relationship. That's what you were trying to point out. Yeah. And I thank you for that. We're going to go for our break, folks. We'll be back and we'll be delving in this world of pitching or developing learning management systems for corporate clients. We'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. I've really enjoyed the conversation so far. It's exactly where I was hoping we were going to go, and with your help, Kurt. So, like we were saying in the first part of the show, that I think what you were outlining is what a lot of people outline. You had built some credibility in the industry through publishing this book and your background, and it's like a lot of people, that's why podcasting or doing any kind of presentation and building up your credibility in a particular industry is so important, isn't it? Now, what I think another factor, and Adrian touched it, is that also large corporations and larger clients are also interested in the support. Are you going to be there consistently?
Yeah.
As a small or medium agency or consultant, how do you overcome those natural reservations that the support standards aren't going to be there?
Well, I'm going to actually go back to something you said earlier, Jonathan. You said that you had worked with a couple of mega churches. And I've been involved in church for a long time. I've been a youth pastor for years, and I just seem to have a way to tie into really responsible kids between the ages of 16 and 25. And, people say, oh, well, you're leveraging, your gift of faith to leverage youth for low pay or whatever. I mean, call me a jerk if you want, but it works out really well. And it gives these kids a real life experience on how to deal with things. So if it's as simple as, hey, I'm going to pay you so much an hour or so much to answer this phone or respond to these emails, they're thrilled to get the work. And I'm thrilled to have someone responsible that can answer a customer's query in less than 10 minutes. And for me, it's the quickness of the answer. And, I have obligations to, it's funny, I call Suzuki my number one client, right? Because I do other things besides Suzuki. But when I'm at Suzuki, I'm there 100%. And Suzuki gets everything I got when I'm on the clock. So if there's a customer issue or a client issue with something else, I need someone that can answer that email or take that phone call, or at least buy me the time to make that personal contact back and fix whatever the situation is. And it works really, really well for me. I've also read like Tim Ferriss's books and stuff, and there are a ton of options for people that aren't in our position, my position. There are a ton of options for people to sublet or subcontract this type of service support work at a very reasonable rate. And I advise everybody to look into that kind of stuff, because you can be a one-man shop working in a loft in your house and put together a couple $100,000 deals and know that you're going to pay thousands of dollars for support labor on the back end, but you're going to be able to sell those big deals. That's
great. Over to you, Adrian.
So a lot of us, myself included, are small businesses. Our mantra is move fast and break things. We all are super creative, and we love to just pull the trigger on whatever makes it or whatever feels right at the moment. However, I am intuitively familiar, or I intuitively know that that's not the way that the corporate world works. And a lot of people, most likely a lot of our listeners, are probably not all too familiar with that corporate structure either. So how would you recommend that someone who's not or wasn't born out of like that corporate infrastructure and actually tailor their process into working in these companies, and how would they manage the relationship in between themselves, who are like super creative and move fast and break things and everything that I said, into also being able to understand what the needs of essentially the corporations are and what their processes are and how fast they move? How does one manage that relationship?
You are describing exactly what I work in at Suzuki. And it should be no secret to people in the industry, so I'm not breaking any corporate rules. They're amazingly socially conservative. So when I told friends in the industry I was going to go to work at Suzuki, they said, dude, you're going to be the best thing to ever happen there. You're going to love it. It's going to be great, but you're not going to be able to do anything for the first year. And I went, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Because they told me in the interview, they want me to do this. And he goes, they'll tell you all kinds of stuff in the interview, but when you go to pull the trigger and make stuff happen, they're going to freak out. And there's a saying in Japan, that it says the protruding nail always gets hammered, right? So if you're the guy in the room with the new ideas and always getting the spotlight, man, they'll beat on you until you leave. And that's a cultural thing. That's a phrase, right? So I will tell you, it took a lot of time, and it took tenacity, and you have to have, I know you've got this, a sense of humor. You have to be able to, for me, I've got Asian vice presidents now that, high five me in corporate meetings and stuff like that. And it's because over 3 years, I've been able to earn their trust by saying, I can do this, watch. And then 3 days later going, look, it's done. And then a week later going, look, I did it last week and it still works. And then, small things, bigger things, bigger things, bigger things. And my key to working with these corporations has been stair-stepping that relationship. And each small step is just exponentially a little bit higher than the next one. The same thing happened at Ducati. You would go over to Bologna, Italy and talk to those folks. And Docebo was who did their e-learning internationally. And then I built the Moodle site just for North America. And I met the Docebo people. Hopefully I'm saying the name right. Sweet folks, nice people from, I can't remember where they're from, a southern town in Italy. And it was great. The relationships were fantastic. But Ducati Motor Company in Italy didn't trust me with the project, until I started to establish myself with the American project and blow it up. So it's just
those stair steps. You start off with small projects first, and you bite off a little bit at a time. And as you kind of build that relationship and they see that it works, it becomes easier to do the things that the creative people want to do and pull triggers on all sorts of stuff and create and make big things happen.
I try to explain this to people that work on my team with me. I run a team of creative people. And we all have these great, big, giant ideas and goals. And I'll go into these corporate meetings with the other upper managers, and I know that the goal is this, but all I pitch them is this, right? Because I know that if I were to hit them with this, they'd freak out and say, there's no way we're not going to write a check for any of it. So you hit them with this one, and it works. And then you go this far, and then you go, okay, now we're here. And I've had to do that multiple times, but it took a lot of trial and error to figure out that that's how it works with these bigger companies and some of the older management in place.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's as if you're going to take value away from this, it's if you're working with big clients, it's that stair stepping of the relationship and the size of the things that you want to change for sure.
Adrian, it's a dichotomy relationship with your own self, because you know what you want to do. And then there's a point in the conversation where some guy in the room is going to go, well, I'm confused. You're only talking about this. I thought you were a big idea guy. And that's where you have to go, oh, well, I've got plenty of ideas for a 5-year plan or a 7-year plan, but I know that you only have the appetite for this at this time. And so you can never let them think you're an idiot that you don't know about this, but you have to let them know that I'm only concentrating on this because I know this is what you have the appetite for at this time, and you've earmarked the budget for this much now. And then we'll look at growing at a rate that's comfortable for you. And then through your own creativity and relationship building, you're able to speed that process up. For example, my 5-year plan at Suzuki, I just checked the last one off and I've been there 3 years. But it's a 5-year plan, and I was able to accelerate the plan, as I earned the trust in the relationship.
Brilliant. Super valuable. Jonathan?
Yeah, as we were discussing in pre-show discussions, Kurt, I think you described when you were building this out with Lifter LMS at Suzuki, it was literally a stunt project. It was with the agreement of a couple of reasonably senior managers, but it wasn't told to the whole crew of Suzuki until you actually. So was there a general resistance to the idea of using open source software in general? Is it?
Yeah. Now my face is probably turning red here, but from a corporate standpoint, they are still very much in everything is self-serve, self-hosted, a giant air-conditioned room in the back of the building. They're still very much in that. And we are seeing slowly our company beginning to adopt some more of the more conventional ideas about, web services, web hosting, web backups, things like that, right? Using the cloud. So there are a couple of vice presidents at the company that, use iPads and, use Dropbox accounts and things like that, right? So they were kind of familiar with when I said cloud hosting something. And so one of the vice presidents used some expletives because he's a colorful person. And he said, we need to bypass the normal process if we're going to launch this project you just proposed. He really wanted me to build a project that would allow us to train new dealerships coming into our network without having to send someone physically to the building, because we're adding so many dealers that you can't send human beings out fast enough to teach people things. And so we built this product to kind of onboard the dealers virtually. And he said, I really want you to do this. We don't have time to wait for the corporate processes to roll out and get approvals. So let's go through one of our vendors, have them get the hosting, have them put everything, where you need it, get the software you need, the Infinity package through Lifter LMS, the whole thing. They put it on their card and then build us on a vendor PO to cover the costs. And that gave me everything I needed to build the product. Once the product was built and the renewals came up a year later, well, then it was, hey, we've already got this product. It's already up. People can already access it. It works. By the way, I need another $600 for another year of hosting, right? And they were like, all right, we don't know how this happened, but here's your check. And now it's an established part. It's part of our processes moving forward to bring dealers on board.
That's great. Over to you, Adrian.
I like the guerrilla operation you had going on there. That's really fun.
There's I don't know if you guys do project management software like Paymo. I use Paymo application. I did a very similar thing at the company. I actually paid for it for the first year. And then after a year, I gave my executive management an hourly report of this is exactly what everybody did for the last year and how you spent your salary dollars. I said, but I'm not going to pay for this anymore. And all of a sudden they were willing to write the check.
You didn't even ask for forgiveness, not for permission, right?
Just do it.
It reminds me of a similar conversation I heard about the people that started Slack. They basically on day one decided that the time it would take to get medium to larger companies to take on Slack, the investment would just be too large. So they aimed at a product at a certain level in an organization, and then they built credibility in those initial users, and then they hoped that it would become more and more people in the organization would be using it without the top management.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating discussion. So we're going to wrap up the podcast part of the show, folks. Hopefully Kurt can stay on for some bonus content. We're going to be discussing basically some of the challenges in building a online course compared to actually physically going and giving training, some of the things that Kurt has learned during this process. Now, Kurt, how can people find out more about you and what you're up to?
Mañana no más is just the absolute best way to find me anywhere on the internet. And I know I'm the whitest guy in the world with a Latin name, but Mañana no más is it. The sign is behind me over my head. And Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the website, mañananomas.com. And in the back end of that is a Lifter LMS powered academy that people can go into. There's even a free course of people that are interested in trying the courses to see what the end user sees without having to invest time. You can try one there, and I dig it. I just totally love all the stuff that we do there.
That's great. And Adrian, how can people find out more about you and your company and what you're up to?
Well, you can go to Groundhog with 2 G's at the end.io to find out more about our sales and marketing automation tools that we provide for WordPress for absolutely free. So if you're looking to send emails, collect subscribers, build a list, build a tribe on WordPress, then you can go to groundhog.io for all of that information and download our free tools.
And I just want to point out what Adrian and his team are trying to do is some of the most difficult, it is impressive what Adrian is attempting to do. It's not easy. And I've been impressed with the level of support and what they're trying to do at Groundhog. If you want to support the show, give us a review on iTunes. It really does help the show. And if you want to see the episodes the earliest, always go to the YouTube, the WP-Tonic YouTube channel, because we publish the shows there the earliest. So if you haven't had enough of, you can't get enough of WP-Tonic, go to the WP-Tonic YouTube channel, subscribe, and you'll be told when the latest show is up. We'll see you next week where we have another great expert. We've got a number of great people in August and September. I'm sure you're going to find value if you stay with us on this journey. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So, Kurt, what are some of the challenges that not challenges, it's not probably the right word, but some of the things that you weren't aware of, the differences of trying to train people using something like Lifter LMS, then going there physically and training people?
Well, the biggest problem with any kind of virtual training is people doing it or actually paying attention to doing it. And I should be really, really clear about this. You know, a lot of learning management systems, you can push play, walk away, get a cup of coffee, go to the restroom, come back, see if it's still playing, hit next, you know, go off and work on a motorcycle, come back, hit next. And then these guys come to class and you're doing an instructor-led course. And if you don't do some type of cursory review or take the temperature of the room to see who actually did the pre-work, you're in for a disaster of a course. And, you know, everybody needs training. Everybody says they want training. HR departments, you know, scream for training. And then when you put it in place, getting managers to actually approve staff to take the training, to get away from whatever the core job is to do the training, is just a nightmare. And, you know, I love learning. I love training, but I don't know how we're going to get over this. I don't know how somebody can pay $30, $50, $80, $100,000 for an education in college or trade school and then be offered free training after school and go, that's not worth my time. Like, I just can't wrap my head around it, but unfortunately that is the normal.
Can we just make them pay for it?
But I mean, the company pays, right? So it's like, you know, the company pays and they say, okay, Jim Bob, you need to take this course on how a torque wrench works. And then 6 months later, Jim Bob, you know, breaks a bolt off on a starter and they go, well, how'd that happen? You know, he wasn't using the torque wrench. Why not? You know, we have an online course. There's an instructor-led course. Like, what happened? Well, I just didn't do that. I didn't feel it wasn't worth my time. Well, it not being worth your time is now going to cost you 3 hours to drill that out and replace hardware in that guy's frame. So it's a very, it's a real life thing. I mean, I can show people time and time again where the training creates revenue for people. But no matter how many times you show them it creating revenue, they still avoid the commitment to do it.
Have you found or are you starting to see a solution that would allow, that would help with that process, that would incentivize people to actually go through the training that their company's paid for? Or are we not there yet?
At my last company, I did it in a disciplinary way, and it worked. It worked very well. What I started doing, and there's no way that my current company would allow me to do this, but the old company did. People would show up on day one. And on day one, we would do a little icebreaker, meet everybody, blah, blah, blah. And then I handed out a written test. If you passed the written test, you got to stay for class. If you failed the written test, you went back to the airport, you flew home and explained to your boss why you just wasted $3,000 of his money.
Oof.
And when I sent the first one home,
imagine why that'd be effective though.
Yeah, when I sent the first one home, it was an argument. When I sent the second one home, it was less of an argument. By the fifth guy, it had pretty much eradicated itself. I mean, at that point, word had spread through the whole network that
imagine it did.
if you weren't prepared to come to class, you were going home. And once the technicians and the dealerships understood that that was the policy, it was amazing what it did to the network. And this is one of those deals where you got to be careful as a trainer not to take too much credit for success, right? But we didn't have as many buybacks with the company. We didn't have as many warranty claims for certain failures. We didn't have, I mean, it was like all of the expenses of running a major corporation started to come down, and the turnover, the technician turnover rate actually slowed down a little bit, and people seemed to be better and more competent at their jobs and happier at what they did. But it was a year and a half of really tough growth.
Wow.
But I think you have to make, I personally believe in some old school stuff. I think you have to make commitment. You have to exercise patience, commitment, and hard work to reap a reward. And this idea that you're just going to be able to YouTube whatever you need to know when you need to know it and make $100,000 a year doing something for a customer, that might work for a short window, but in the long scope and in the scope of consistency, that's not a viable answer. You have to get real training.
Can't go out at the garden, plant a seed, and expect it to be a flower next day.
Yeah. I think it takes work and patience, and that's something that just seems to be getting lost. And for us trainers and people in a virtual world, that is an obstacle we're going to face unless we do put some kind of, either you dangle the carrot with the reward, like you're going to get $1,000 bonus to complete this class successfully, or if people aren't willing to pay the reward, smack them with the discipline up front and say, if you're not prepared, you don't get to finish.
Free year Ducati lease.
There you go.
Suggestion. You were mentioning earlier how when you were trying to find new clients and you were bringing on new clients and you started this digital pathway, you were attracting not so great clients in the beginning with your pricing structure, and then you changed that pricing structure. I'm sure everybody's curious. What were the numbers actually? If people are looking or they're thinking, hey, listen, I don't have great clients right now, I want better clients. Where should they be looking in terms of price point?
So I'm just guessing. There are probably some people watching this podcast that are brand new starting out, and they're confused. They're saying, why are companies paying $10,000 to have a WordPress site made when I can make one for $500? And I could sell that site for $750 and make $250. And there's people that are thinking to themselves, that's viable. Like I could do that. And during the downturn of the economy, I was one of those. I was like, man, I can make a quick $200 throwing this up for somebody. I can make a quick $300 throwing this up for somebody. And what I got was people that didn't have a message, didn't have any content, didn't have a logo made, couldn't pick their own colors, nothing. And that progressed for a while. Everybody wanted to use me because I was cheap, but nobody was prepared to use me because they weren't prepared. And so then I started doubling down on pricing, and I started getting people that had some content but didn't have a logo. And then I got people that had the content and the logo. And like the more I increased the price, the more prepared my customers were. The hardest thing was getting people to follow through. So I would say, well, how soon until you get your logo done? And they would say, well, I'll have it in October. And then next May would roll around and they'd be like, oh, here's my logo. And by the way, I have to have the website up by Friday because there's a fair, a festival or whatever, right? And you're going, whoa, wait a minute. I needed 2 months to put this together, and now you want me to do it in a week. You're 6 months late with your product, and now you want me to jump through hoops. And that's kind of how the Mañana No Mas name came about. I used to live in Albuquerque, and I had a lot of Spanish clients. And I kind of threw a fit one day, and I said, you can't keep putting it off. If you're not vested in your own success, I can't help you. Mañana No Mas, there's no tomorrow. You've got to get things done today. And then the guy that ran our incubation center, he said, man, that's a great name for a business. And that's how Mañana No Mas got started. Now from there, as soon as Mañana No Mas started, I changed the entire policy. I basically tripled all my prices, and I told people that if they met with me and we did the needs assessment and they signed the scope of work contract, that they also worked on a deadline. And if they missed their deadline, I kept their money and chucked them out of the system. And everybody said, that's not the way to run a business. Nobody's going to want to work with you. And all it did was attract everybody that wanted to be a success in the area. And I ended up with some of the best clients and the best revenue that I've ever experienced.
Just goes to show perception is everything.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I worked at a really cool economic development center. So I had use of, a great office, great conference room. I mean, the imagery was there. And, we discussed earlier that you don't have to do it all yourself. You can subcontract or sublet, email follow-ups and phone call answering and stuff like that. So I had the appearance of a really well-run team, but realistically I was, feeding my family.
Awesome. Jonathan?
Yeah, just to wrap up, what in your own using Lifter LMS, how much is quizzes, gamification, video with text? How much of the, especially gamification, and also the idea of micro, the length of a video, the modularization of lessons into micro lessons, have these been things that you've been looking at? And if so, is any of it actually worth trying, or are they, in your experience, a lot of this just buzzwords?
All of it. You really put me on the spot, Jonathan, because we've discussed all.
I have a tendency to do that with my guests.
It's okay. I've discussed all of it with my teams. I am somebody that loves to truncate the message as much as possible without losing the core message. So that said, I will take a large subject and I will chunk it into 4 or 5 chapters if I have to. There may be 4 modules on how to work on a certain part of a motorcycle, and each module might be 40 minutes. But that's because I know that person doesn't have 240 minutes or 160 minutes to sit at one spell, but they can break it into, consumable pieces. The quizzes I absolutely use. I think it's imperative, because if they can't pass the quiz to finish the theory course, they don't belong in my instructor-led course. So I use that as a gauge. You have to successfully complete the class and the knowledge check, to the course and the knowledge check, to be able to come to my class. So I think that's important. But the gamification and stuff like that, especially in a corporate setting, I'll be honest with you, I've looked at it, I've played with it, I implemented it for a little bit, and I didn't see a return for me professionally in the areas that I worked. So I discontinued it because it was more effort than what I was seeing from it. And my students didn't seem to appreciate it. Now, in other areas, or in personal development that's independent, I could see where gamification might be fun or more interactive and add to the experience. So I don't want to poo-poo the idea for people that are using it. But in my specific instances, it has not been successful.
I think that's a great answer. We're going to wrap up the show now, folks. We'll see you next week, where we have a similar great guest like Kurt, and we'll continue to try and help you become a successful e-learning entrepreneur in 2019. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.